My boyfriend publicly humiliated me on our day after promising he wouldn't, so I got more than even. I exposed him for who he was to everyone, so he went insane and started stalking me, making me fear for my life. Now I'm pursuing legal action, but I'm not even sure that's going to stop him. I had been with Trevor for a little over 3 years. At first, he was kind and caring, placing his hand on my lower back to guide me through a crowd. Our relationship had its cracks, but I thought we were happy. We both wanted to travel, we weren't sure about having kids, and we wanted to own a house. But there was one thing, and it's that Trevor loved to make fun of people. Even me. He'd make jokes about his friend in front of girls to make them laugh, about me in front of his guy friends to make them laugh, always playing it off as just banter if I got upset. That should have been the red flag that made me end it, but he had me wrapped around his finger. Anyway, about 6 months ago, I got invited by my best friend to this snowball I had been wanting to go to. I was so over the moon, I simply couldn't hold it in. I started dancing in my room, excited about how I was finally going to feel like a princess. So when Trevor came home and told me I was going to need a lot of makeup to fit in with the rest of the girls, I felt defeated. And when I clearly got upset at his comment, he started up his usual comments of it was just a joke, that I'm overreacting, and that he can't say anything without me getting mad. He convinced me that he was just joking, and that I would look beautiful at the ball. As the ball got closer, the more and more excited I got, but Trevor sucked all the fun out of it. Every dress I showed was either too revealing or too old-fashioned, made me look too fat or too skinny. Every pair of heels was too inviting to guys or too ugly. Every hairstyle was too much or too little. It seemed like I couldn't do anything right. I wouldn't have even minded if he put in an equal amount of effort, but he didn't. He picked out the first $45 suit he found in an old thrift store, and then called me shallow for wanting him to put more effort into it. On the day of the ball, despite everything, I was amped. I was going to go with the man I wanted to be my husband, and I was going to sing and dance my heart out. Trevor, however, he was clearly mad. He told me many times he felt like I was just dragging him, and that he was going to prank me at some point during the night just so he could have more fun. I remember fully believing he was just joking, and that no way would he take his jokes to such an extreme and embarrass me on a day so important to me. I was so naive. The night of the ball started out fine. Trevor and I danced a little and drank just enough to be in a good mood. I kept convincing myself the entire time that this was what I wanted, that every time he'd crack a joke about how bad my makeup was, he didn't mean it, that every time he held my hips to dance and commented about how much ice cream I'd been eating lately, he was just trying to make me laugh, and that he didn't have some elaborate prank in mind. Well, that's when he excused himself to go bathroom, telling me he needed a few minutes for private manners. He came back out with a little wrapped box the size of my hand and gave it to me. He placed it in my hand, telling me he loved me, and that this is his apology for acting like a jerk throughout the entire ball preparations. I remember falling in love with him all over again at that moment. My cheeks went pink, and I asked him if I should wait to open it. He told me no, and that I should do it right now, and so I did. That moment is now forever seared into my brain. The second I opened the box, a coating of purple slimy liquid shot right out of it and went straight into my face, ruining my face, my makeup, my dress, and my hair. I was covered head to toe in slimy purple liquid. Trevor started dying laughing, and the people around us stopped and just stared at me. A few even started recording. I looked up at Trevor, my eyes welling with tears, but instead of showing an ounce of compassion, he was just laughing, telling me I should see my face right now. I stood there feeling absolutely defeated, feeling like I had betrayed the little girl in me down. I wanted to scream. I pinched myself, hoping to wake up and realize this was all some messed up dream, but I never did. And Trevor just took my cheek. He told me not to cry, that it was just a joke, and asked me to please not overreact because that would make him sad on this fun day. So that's what I did. I smiled at him, laughing and telling him this was funny, and the idiot bought it. Inside me, a storm was brewing. So while he went to get us some drinks, my mind started racing at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Trevor had no idea what was coming. He thought he could publicly humiliate me for fun and get away with it, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I maintained that fake smile for the rest of the night, even though I was completely devastated inside and already plotting my revenge. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I spent 20 minutes trying to salvage what I could of my appearance while holding back tears. Some kind stranger even offered me her pashmina to cover the worst of the stains. When I came back out, Trevor had the audacity to look annoyed that I'd disappeared for so long. I started secretly recording Trevor's jokes on my phone whenever he'd say something particularly cruel, building up evidence of his behavior without him noticing. I figured if he could record my humiliation, I could certainly keep track of his everyday cruelty. The morning after the snowball, Trevor acted like nothing had even happened. But I noticed there were already several videos of my humiliation circulating online among our social circle. He'd actually shared them himself with captions like, "Watch until the end, LOL, and got her good," as if ruining a special night for me was something to be proud of. I saved every single one of them as evidence while continuing to pretend everything was normal between us. I wanted to leave Trevor immediately after what he did, but I was stuck in a tough spot financially since I couldn't afford our apartment on my own. We'd signed a lease together, and breaking it would cost thousands I didn't have. I didn't have enough saved for a security deposit on a new place, so I created a secret savings account and started putting away as much money as I could from each paycheck. I picked up extra shifts at work and sold some things online, all while Trevor remained completely oblivious to my plans. My best friend Sophia called to check on me after seeing the videos, but I had to be careful because Trevor often monitored my phone calls and would question me about who I was talking to. He'd casually pick up my phone whenever it buzzed and check the notifications, claiming he was just curious. Sophia and I developed this code language where we could discuss my escape plan during what Trevor thought were just book club conversations. We'd talk about Chapter 7 when we meant Week 7 of the plan and use character names to refer to real people involved. I also reconnected with my cousin Dallas, who works in event planning and might be able to help me with the revenge part of my plan. Dallas and I had drifted apart a bit during my relationship with Trevor, mostly because Trevor claimed Dallas was too dramatic. Translation: Dallas saw through his BS from day one. Trevor started getting suspicious about all the texts I was exchanging with Dallas, so we switched to communicating through a fitness app's messaging feature, since Trevor would never think to check there. The man hadn't exercised voluntarily in the entire time I'd known him. The closest he got to a workout was walking to the fridge for another beer during football games. Dallas offered to help orchestrate my revenge plan, but needed more details about Trevor's work life and schedule, so I started paying closer attention to his job schedules and the office politics he'd complain about. I realized I'd spent 3 years listening to him talk about himself, so I actually knew a ton about his workplace dynamics without him realizing it. I discovered that Trevor's company was planning this major client presentation where he would be the center of attention, which seemed perfect for what I had in mind. He'd been bragging about it for weeks, saying how it was his chance to really impress the higher-ups and possibly get a promotion. The only problem was that security was pretty tight at his workplace, so I befriended his coworker TJ, who also had issues with Trevor's jokes, since Trevor would mock TJ's stutter behind his back. TJ revealed to me that Trevor had been making fun of his speech impediment for months, but he was afraid of workplace retaliation if he reported it. He showed me some genuinely cruel text messages Trevor had sent him, including one where Trevor had recorded an audio clip mocking TJ's speech pattern after a presentation. We formed an alliance pretty quickly after that conversation, both of us wanting to expose Trevor's behavior but needing to be smart about it. TJ had access to the building and knowledge of the company's systems that would prove invaluable. I wanted the revenge to be as public as possible, but I didn't want to risk any legal problems, so I consulted my friend Sadie, who was in law school, to make sure my plan stayed within legal boundaries. Sadie had never liked Trevor either. She'd witnessed him belittling me at a party the previous year and had tried to warn me about his behavior. Sadie advised me on what would constitute harassment, but also warned me about potential backlash, which made me refine my plan to make everything appear more coincidental rather than a deliberate attack. She helped me understand exactly how to gather evidence without breaking any laws myself. Through all my research and planning, I learned that Trevor had this severe fear of public embarrassment, despite how comfortable he was embarrassing others. He hid this vulnerability really well, but I'd seen how he'd react when he was the butt of jokes, so I decided to target this specific insecurity in my revenge plan. He could dish it out, but absolutely couldn't take it. Classic bully behavior. My scheme required some technical assistance that was beyond my abilities, so I recruited my tech-savvy neighbor Teddy, who owed me a favor after I watched his dog during a family emergency. Teddy was this quiet genius type who worked remotely for a tech company and could make computers do practically anything. He helped me set up these hidden recording devices in our apartment, but we had a close call when one of them malfunctioned and started making this beeping sound while Trevor was home. I had to quickly make up a fake plumbing emergency in the bathroom to distract him while Teddy snuck in to fix the device. My heart was pounding so hard I thought Trevor might actually hear it as I frantically pointed at a non-existent water stain on the ceiling. Over several weeks, I compiled a montage of Trevor's cruel jokes targeting friends, coworkers, and me, but I needed more incriminating material to really drive the point home. I started subtly provoking his worst behavior while recording, asking him questions that would lead to his most offensive comments. I'd say things like, "What did you think of your boss's presentation today?" knowing he'd launch into a mocking impression of his boss's speech patterns. The plan was coming together nicely when Trevor suddenly mentioned wanting to take our relationship to the next level, which totally freaked me out. I had a moment of panic thinking he might propose, which would make everything so much more complicated. I had to accelerate my timeline before he proposed and made everything even more complicated. I couldn't imagine anything worse than having to say no to a proposal in the middle of executing this elaborate revenge plan. As Trevor's big client presentation approached, I needed to gain access to the venue beforehand to set things up. I volunteered to help TJ with some prep work, which got me a visitor's pass to the building. I even brought homemade cookies for the security team, establishing myself as a friendly face they wouldn't question too much. While I was there, I scouted the conference room where the presentation would happen, but noticed security cameras everywhere. This wasn't as simple as I'd initially thought. I carefully mapped out their blind spots and timing patterns so I'd know where I could move without being recorded later. I didn't want to leave any evidence that could be traced back to me. This had to look like a technical glitch or Trevor's own doing if possible. Dallas helped me create a fake email account that mimicked Trevor's boss's email, but our first draft looked kind of suspicious. We kept going back and forth, tweaking the wording and formatting until it was right. We studied his boss's writing style from company newsletters and announcements to perfect our forgery and make it more convincing. Dallas had an eye for these details from his event planning work. He was used to matching corporate tones perfectly. The fake email instructed Trevor to prepare an additional personal introduction segment for his presentation. He was initially suspicious about this last-minute change, so I casually mentioned overhearing his colleagues discussing presentation changes to make him believe it was legitimate. I said something like, "Oh, didn't your boss email everyone about the new format? I thought I heard TJ mentioning it on the phone yesterday." Trevor ended up staying up late working on his new introduction, stressing about getting it right, so I helpfully suggested he include personal anecdotes about his colleagues to seem more relatable and engaging. I even helped him brainstorm stories that I knew would lead to him making slightly inappropriate comments, all while pretending to be the supportive girlfriend. TJ gave me the final presentation schedule, but the timing was going to be really tight, so Sophia helped me practice our timing down to the second, so we wouldn't mess it up. We ran through the whole sequence multiple times in her apartment, using a stopwatch to make sure everything would go smoothly on the day. I needed Trevor to wear a specific suit to the presentation that would be easily recognizable in the video evidence I had, but he was leaning toward wearing another outfit. I accidentally spilled coffee on his preferred choice the night before, leaving him with limited options. I felt a little bad about this part, but then remembered how he'd ruined my expensive dress on purpose and got over it pretty quickly. The morning of the presentation, Trevor was noticeably nervous, and I played the supportive partner role perfectly. I made his favorite breakfast, gave him a pep talk about how well he'd do, and generally acted like the world's most encouraging girlfriend. He gratefully accepted my offer to double-check his presentation materials before he left. I acted all businesslike, clicking through his slides and nodding approvingly. While checking his materials, I subtly swapped his presentation USB with my doctored version, but almost got caught when he returned to the room unexpectedly. He walked in just as I was pocketing the original USB drive, and my heart nearly stopped. I created a quick diversion by pretending to receive an urgent call from my mother that I had to take immediately. I dramatically waved my phone at him and hurried out of the room, pretending to be deep in conversation with my mom about some made-up crisis. Trevor arrived at the venue early as planned, but then called me saying he'd forgotten his notes at home. I offered to bring them to him, which gave me a legitimate reason to be at the venue during the presentation. This was actually perfect since I needed to be there anyway for the plan to work. It was like the universe was helping me get revenge. When I arrived at the venue, security was even tighter than I'd expected, but I had brought homemade cookies for the office staff, which helped me get through with minimal questioning. Most security guards aren't suspicious of someone bringing baked goods, in my experience. I've found that people letting their guard down around food is a universal constant. I needed to access the AV room to finish setting up my plan, but found it locked when I got there. Fortunately, I used the access card TJ had accidentally left in the folder with Trevor's notes that I was delivering. TJ had been incredibly helpful throughout this whole process, motivated by years of Trevor's mockery. Once in the AV room, I quickly installed Teddy's custom program on the presentation system, but it required an admin password I didn't have. I had a moment of panic, thinking the whole plan might fall apart at this critical moment. I used the one TJ had obtained from the IT department during what he called routine maintenance the day before. TJ had casually mentioned computer troubles to the IT guy and watched him enter the password, memorizing it for our plan. The program was designed to override the presentation when Trevor said a specific trigger word, but I worried he might not use it naturally in his speech. To ensure he would, I had planted the word excellence multiple times in his new introduction notes, knowing he'd follow them closely since he was nervous. I chose excellence because it was something he'd naturally say in a corporate environment without raising suspicion. The conference room started filling up with executives and clients while I was finishing my preparations. I could see them through the small window in the AV room door, all suits and power dresses and expectant faces. Trevor spotted me lingering nearby and looked suspicious, so I pretended I was just leaving after dropping off his forgotten notes and wished him luck with a kiss, playing the supportive girlfriend one last time. I even straightened his tie and told him he looked handsome, which made him smile with that arrogant confidence I'd grown to hate. Trevor confidently took the stage before all the gathered executives and important clients, but seemed momentarily confused by the altered title slide on his presentation. It had a slightly different design than what he'd prepared, but nothing obviously wrong. He recovered quickly, improvising and attributing the change to creative marketing by the design team. I was watching from the back of the room, heart pounding so hard I thought people might hear it. He began his personal introduction as instructed in the fake email, completely unaware of what would happen when he said the trigger word. I could see he was actually proud of this introduction, thinking it showed his personal side in a professional way. He dramatically emphasized excellence while talking about the company's standards, which immediately activated Teddy's program. The screen suddenly switched from his PowerPoint to my compiled video of Trevor's cruel jokes and pranks. There was a moment of panic when the audio wasn't working properly, but I remotely triggered the backup Bluetooth speakers we had hidden throughout the room the day before. TJ had helped me place them under tables and behind plants where they wouldn't be noticed. The video showed Trevor mocking his boss's lisp in private conversations, and his frantic attempts to stop the presentation failed completely. He was pushing buttons on his laptop and the podium controls, but nothing was responding. The entire room witnessed him calling the CEO a pathetic man-child with a speech impediment, in crystal clear audio. The CEO's face went from confused to absolutely furious in about 3 seconds flat. Trevor desperately tried unplugging the projector to stop the video, but the system was running on multiple redundant connections that TJ had set up, so the video continued playing on all screens in the room simultaneously. He even tried to stand in front of the main screen, but there were too many displays for him to block. The footage transitioned to show Trevor belittling TJ's stutter, and when Trevor claimed it was some kind of deepfake, the video seamlessly showed multiple instances from different days with consistent background details that proved its authenticity. You could see the color draining from his face as he realized how thoroughly he'd been caught. Trevor attempted to blame the whole thing on a technical glitch, but the video then showed him explicitly planning the purple slime prank for the snowball, proving his premeditation to everyone watching. This part included him shopping for the most permanent, hard-to-remove slime he could find, specifically mentioning that he wanted something that would really ruin her night. Security personnel started moving toward the AV controls to try to stop the presentation, but I had already left the area, so they couldn't stop it in time. I was watching everything unfold from a perfectly innocent position at the back of the room, my expression carefully arranged to show the same shock everyone else was displaying. The compilation continued with clips of Trevor mocking female executives' appearances, and when he tried claiming it was taken out of context, the video included enough before and after context to completely disprove his defense. There was no way to misinterpret him saying one executive's pregnancy made her look like a beached whale, or that another had a face that would make radio a good career choice. Trevor's face grew increasingly red as the video showed him joking about clients' accents and foreign names. He made one last desperate excuse, but was cut off by the final clip showing him explicitly saying, "These idiots will never know what I really think of them," when referring to the clients who were now watching the video. Several of those clients were now standing up, gathering their materials, and heading toward the exit, clearly unwilling to do business with a company that employed someone like Trevor. The video ended with my snowball humiliation playing in full, but now included Trevor's private comments admitting he did it to take me down a peg because I was getting too confident. His deliberate cruelty was undeniable to everyone present in that room. The final frame froze on an image of me covered in purple slime while Trevor laughed, with a caption that simply read, "Is this really who you want representing your company?" As the lights came up, Trevor spotted me standing at the back of the room and looked like he wanted to kill me, but security was now focused on him and his outburst. So I calmly walked out while he was surrounded by angry colleagues and clients demanding explanations. He was gesturing wildly, pointing at me and shouting about sabotage, but no one was listening to him anymore. Trevor tried calling me repeatedly as I left the building, but I had anticipated this reaction and had already set my phone to automatically send his calls to voicemail with a custom message. "You're right, it's just a joke. Why are you overreacting?" I felt a deep sense of satisfaction hearing that his calls had gone straight to that message. I met up with TJ and Sophia, who were waiting in a car outside, but we worried Trevor might follow us. So we took a circuitous route to Dallas's apartment, where I'd arranged to stay temporarily until I figured out my next steps. We drove around for nearly an hour, taking random turns and doubling back to make sure we weren't being followed before finally heading to Dallas's place. The client meeting ended with Trevor being escorted out of the building, and videos of the incident were already circulating within the company. Apparently someone had recorded it on their phone, and it was being shared in company chat groups with increasingly horrified comments. By evening, just like my humiliation at the Snowball, Trevor's professional meltdown had gone viral among industry circles. Karma had come full circle in the most satisfying way possible. Trevor showed up at Dallas's apartment building that night, somehow figuring out where I was staying, but couldn't get past the building's security desk. I honestly hadn't expected him to find me so quickly, and it scared me to realize how determined he was. He created such a scene in the lobby that the night guard called the police, which only made things worse for him. He was yelling about how I'd ruined his life and demanding to see me, all while the security guard calmly repeated that I wasn't accepting visitors. The officers took my statement about Trevor's history of emotional abuse and the recent events, but said they lacked grounds for immediate action since he hadn't explicitly threatened me. They advised me to file for a restraining order, which I did first thing the next morning. I filed for a temporary restraining order first thing the next morning based on his behavior. The process was more complicated than I expected, involving a lot of paperwork and a brief appearance before a judge to explain why I felt unsafe. Meanwhile, Trevor was placed on administrative leave at work, but he was claiming he was being unfairly targeted and that the video was manipulated. He was trying to spin it as some elaborate conspiracy against him rather than simply facing the consequences of his own actions. His company launched a formal investigation into his workplace behavior, interviewing several co-workers about his conduct. Several people who had previously stayed silent about his behavior now felt emboldened to come forward with their own stories. I needed to collect my belongings from our shared apartment, but I was afraid to go alone after seeing how angry he was. So Sophia, Dallas, and TJ accompanied me while Trevor was in a meeting with HR. We brought several large suitcases and boxes, planning to get everything in one trip if possible. We quickly packed as many of my essential items as possible, but Trevor returned home unexpectedly in the middle of our packing. We had to leave with only about half of my belongings as he physically blocked the doorway and refused to let us take anything else. He was standing there with his arms crossed, saying I couldn't take his stuff, even though these were clearly my personal possessions. Trevor demanded I explain the presentation sabotage, but I maintained a confused innocence, pretending I had no idea what he was talking about. I just kept saying things like, "I don't know what happened at your presentation, but I'm sorry it didn't go well," while continuing to gather what I could of my things. He grew increasingly frustrated without getting the confrontation and admission he wanted from me. The more calmly I responded, the more agitated he became. I received notice a few days later that Trevor had contested the restraining order I'd filed, but thankfully I had substantial evidence of his harassment and pattern of behavior. I had been documenting everything meticulously for months, saving texts, emails, and recordings that demonstrated his emotional abuse. The judge extended the temporary order pending a full hearing to determine if it should be made permanent. Trevor created multiple fake social media accounts to contact me after being blocked on his main accounts, but Teddy helped me enhance my online security and privacy settings. He set up alerts for any accounts that seemed suspicious, and helped me configure my accounts to only accept messages from verified contacts. His attempts to digitally harass me were largely unsuccessful thanks to these precautions. He tried leaving comments on old posts, creating accounts with names similar to our mutual friends, and even tried contacting me through gaming platforms we'd used together. But Teddy had thought of everything. Trevor's company investigation uncovered additional complaints from female coworkers that had previously gone unreported, but he claimed they were all retaliating against him for unrelated issues. He couldn't accept that his behavior was the problem and kept looking for external explanations for why everyone was suddenly against him. The company hired an outside firm to conduct an impartial review of all the allegations to cover their legal bases. They wanted to make sure any action they took would stand up to potential legal challenges from Trevor. I found a small affordable studio apartment to move into, but the landlord needed a co-signer due to my limited credit history. My previously estranged mother surprisingly stepped up to help me out, which was completely unexpected given our rocky relationship. We hadn't been close for years after a falling out during my college days, so her support now meant more than she could know. Reconciling with my mother during this crisis reopened some old wounds from our past, but she acknowledged her past mistakes and seemed genuinely sorry for not being there for me before. We slowly began rebuilding our relationship while I was dealing with all this Trevor drama. We started with weekly phone calls that were awkward at first, but gradually became more comfortable as we learned to trust each other again. Trevor eventually lost his job after the external investigation confirmed there was a clear pattern of inappropriate behavior toward colleagues. The company offered him a modest severance package on the condition that he sign an NDA about the incident, which he reluctantly accepted. He blamed me entirely for his downfall and refused to take any responsibility, which only made his harassment attempts more intense. He seemed to believe that if he hadn't been exposed, his behavior would have been perfectly acceptable, missing the point entirely. He began showing up at places he knew I frequented, like my favorite coffee shop and the grocery store near my new apartment, but this violated the terms of the restraining order. I started varying my routines and asking friends to accompany me on errands just to be safe. I reported each incident to the police, who finally issued him a formal warning after the third time it happened. They told him the next violation would result in arrest, which seemed to finally get through to him at least temporarily. I started worrying about the upcoming restraining order hearing as the date approached, but I continued documenting every encounter and message meticulously. I created a binder with everything organized chronologically, including witness statements from people who had seen Trevor's behavior firsthand. With Sadie's guidance, I built a strong case showing Trevor's pattern of behavior both before and after our breakup. Sadie helped me understand what to expect in court and how to present my evidence effectively. The stress of the situation definitely affected my performance at work, but my boss, Throw RA, was surprisingly understanding about everything I was going through. She shared that she had been in an emotionally abusive relationship herself years ago and recognized the signs of what I was dealing with. She granted me temporary, flexible hours so I could attend all the legal proceedings without risking my job. This flexibility was a lifesaver during such a chaotic time. The day of the restraining order hearing finally arrived, and I was absolutely terrified of facing Trevor in court. I had nightmares the night before and barely slept, spending hours rehearsing what I would say if questioned. Sophia and Dallas came along for moral support, which helped me keep it together. Just seeing their familiar faces in the courtroom gallery gave me strength when I felt like falling apart. Trevor arrived with this expensive-looking lawyer in a fancy suit, but I had Sadie helping me pro bono, which made me feel more confident walking into the courtroom despite being outgunned financially. Sadie had prepared me well, helping me organize my evidence and practice answering potential questions. I was nervous but ready. Trevor's lawyer tried to portray him as the victim of a vindictive prank that cost him his career, but I had documented evidence of his pattern of behavior going back months. Text messages, emails, witness statements, and the recordings I'd been collecting all painted a clear picture of Trevor's true character. The judge appeared pretty skeptical of his claims as the evidence mounted. You could almost see the moment when the judge stopped believing Trevor's version of events. Trevor's lawyer questioned my motivations for the presentation sabotage and tried to get me to admit involvement, but I maintained that I had no direct involvement in what happened. I just kept repeating that I didn't know who had created the video compilation, though I confirmed that the clips of Trevor's behavior were authentic. Without definitive proof connecting me to the incident, they couldn't shake my story. I just looked confused whenever they tried to get me to admit involvement. Trevor completely lost his composure during cross-examination when Sadie questioned him about the snowball incident, which only reinforced my claims about his temperament and behavior. When asked if he thought humiliating me publicly was appropriate behavior, he actually said it was just a harmless prank, and that I was being dramatic about it. The judge witnessed his barely controlled anger firsthand, which definitely didn't help his case. He actually raised his voice to Sadie when she pressed him on details. The judge granted a 1-year restraining order, but it was limited to personal contact, not digital communication, which meant I had to manually block Trevor across all platforms and monitor for new accounts he might create. The judge explained that the evidence clearly showed a pattern of harassment that justified the order, but that the digital restrictions were more difficult to enforce given current laws. I was disappointed but understood the limitations. Trevor's lawyer immediately filed an appeal against the restraining order, but the process would take months to resolve. In the meantime, the existing order remained in effect, giving me some peace of mind. I could at least know that he couldn't legally come near my home or workplace without consequences. I felt momentary relief after the court victory, but I still had to retrieve the rest of my belongings from our old apartment. The judge authorized a police escort for a specific date and time so I could get my stuff without another confrontation. I was nervous about seeing the apartment again, but determined to get back what belonged to me. When I arrived with the police escort to collect my remaining possessions, I discovered that many of them had been damaged or destroyed. My books had pages torn out, photo frames were smashed, and some of my favorite clothes had been cut up with scissors. Trevor claimed it happened during cleaning and wasn't intentional, so I could only document the damage without any immediate recourse. The police officers couldn't do anything since there was no way to prove when or how the items had been damaged. I filed a small claim suit for my damaged property, but the court date was months away due to the backlog of cases. The legal system moves incredibly slowly, which was frustrating when I just wanted to move on with my life. I had to replace essential items immediately, which put an additional strain on my already tight finances. I ended up having to use credit cards for some purchases, adding debt to my financial stress. Trevor began dating someone new surprisingly quickly after everything that happened, but it seemed like he was mainly using this new relationship to create a facade of having moved on with his life. He posted constantly about how happy they were, how drama-free his new relationship was, and made veiled references to toxic exes that were obviously about me. Our mutual friends started questioning whether I had overreacted about his behavior, believing his new narrative. Some even suggested I should let it go, now that he had moved on. I attempted to explain the reality of the situation to our friend group, but Trevor had already shaped the narrative to make himself look like the victim. Several friends took his side, believing I had maliciously sabotaged his career over what they now considered a harmless prank at the snowball. It hurt to realize how easily people could be manipulated by his version of events, despite having witnessed his behavior themselves. The divided friend group created additional stress in my life, but Sophia stood firmly by me throughout everything. She never wavered in her support, even when mutual friends tried to get her to see both sides. We focused on building new social connections through her volunteer work at a local community center, rather than trying to win back people who'd chosen sides. The volunteer work gave me a sense of purpose and introduced me to people who knew nothing about the Trevor drama. At one of Sophia's volunteer events, I met this guy PR, a kind physical therapist who was volunteering his services. He was helping seniors with mobility exercises and had this gentle, patient demeanor that immediately stood out to me. I was extremely hesitant to share my recent experiences with anyone new, so I kept our conversations light and impersonal initially, not wanting to dump my baggage on someone I just met. The last thing I wanted was to be defined by what had happened with Trevor. PR and I developed a friendship over several volunteer sessions, and I started to open up a little more about what I'd been through. He was a good listener and never pushed for more information than I was comfortable sharing. Somehow Trevor discovered this new connection, probably through mutual acquaintances, and began spreading rumors that I had been cheating with PR during our relationship, which was completely false since I'd only met him after moving out. These rumors were particularly hurtful because fidelity had always been important to me. The rumors about PR and me eventually reached our volunteer group, but PR calmly addressed them directly instead of getting defensive or disappearing like I feared he might. He simply stated the timeline of when we'd met and pointed out the impossibility of the claims. Most people recognized the falsehoods for what they were, especially since the timeline didn't make any sense. They'd all seen me start volunteering after my breakup with Trevor. PR's supportive response to the rumors drew us closer together, but I remained extremely cautious about getting romantically involved with anyone so soon. I was still processing everything that had happened and didn't fully trust my own judgment yet. We established clear boundaries as friends first, both agreeing that taking things slow was the healthiest approach given what I'd just been through. PR respected these boundaries completely, never pressuring me for more than I was ready to give. Trevor's new relationship ended pretty abruptly after a few weeks, but somehow he found a way to blame this on me as well. According to mutual friends, he told people I had poisoned his new girlfriend against him by reaching out to her, which was completely untrue. I'd never contacted her at all. His fixation on me intensified even though he maintained the legal distance required by the restraining order. He seemed unable to accept that his own behavior might be the reason his relationships failed. I discovered that Trevor had created a blog detailing his twisted version of events, portraying himself as the victim and me as a manipulative person who destroyed his life. Many posts contained thinly veiled threats, so Sadie helped me document these for potential legal action if they crossed the line. The blog was public, but thankfully didn't include my full name, though anyone who knew us would recognize who he was talking about. I tried not to read it, but occasionally checked to make sure he wasn't posting anything that could endanger me. The small claims court date for my damaged property finally arrived after months of waiting. Trevor brought counter evidence claiming I had damaged the items before leaving our apartment, showing photos that were obviously staged after the fact. You could actually see in some of the photos that the damage was fresh, with clean tears and cuts rather than the wear they would show if they'd been damaged months earlier. The judge ended up ordering a reduced payment that barely covered the replacement costs of the most essential items. It was better than nothing, but still disappointing after waiting so long for resolution. Trevor followed the court order and paid the settlement amount, but included a note saying, "This isn't over" with the payment. The pettiness was so typical of him. He couldn't just comply with the court order. He had to include one last little jab. I reported this violation to my case officer, but they didn't consider it an actionable threat on its own. They said it was too vague to be considered a direct threat, despite the clear implication. My case officer suggested continuing to document any further contact from Trevor, but didn't think the note met the threshold for legal action. It was frustrating to feel like the system wouldn't take action until something more serious happened. I invested in a security camera for my apartment door just to be safe, wanting to have evidence if he ever showed up. The peace of mind was worth the expense, even on my tight budget. I also joined a support group for people who had experienced similar situations, which helped me feel less alone. A few weeks later, I noticed someone had been in my car when several items were moved around, but nothing was actually stolen. The police classified it as suspicious activity rather than a crime since there was no damage or theft, even though I was pretty sure it was Trevor. I started being extra vigilant about locking my car and even installed a small dash cam that would record if anyone approached. The security camera eventually caught Trevor approaching my door late one night, but he didn't knock or attempt to enter the apartment. He just stood there for a few minutes before leaving, which authorities considered borderline behavior that didn't explicitly violate the restraining order since he didn't make contact. He was technically outside the minimum distance requirement, standing just at the edge of what was legally allowed. I grew increasingly anxious about my safety with these escalating behaviors, but I couldn't afford to move again so soon after getting the new apartment. Moving is expensive, and I was still recovering financially from the first move. PR suggested I temporarily stay at his guest room on nights when I felt particularly unsafe, which I occasionally accepted. His apartment was in a secure building with a doorman, which made me feel much safer than being alone. Trevor somehow discovered I sometimes stayed at PR's apartment, and completely misconstrued this as a serious relationship rather than a safety precaution. He shifted his harassment to include PR, apparently feeling threatened by our friendship. He sent anonymous messages to the volunteer coordinator questioning PR's professionalism and suggesting he was taking advantage of vulnerable women. PR received anonymous threatening messages that were obviously from Trevor, but he maintained his supportive friendship despite the harassment. He reported the messages to the police, but, like me, was told there wasn't enough to take action. Our bond actually strengthened through this shared adversity as we dealt with the situation together. We found ourselves talking more openly about our feelings and supporting each other through the stress. I hesitantly accepted a promotion at work that included some public-facing responsibilities like giving presentations to clients, but I worried about Trevor showing up to these events. The promotion meant a significant pay increase that I desperately needed, but the public aspect of it made me nervous given Trevor's unpredictable behavior. My boss implemented additional security protocols for company events after I explained the situation, which helped ease my anxiety somewhat. They assigned someone to greet and check in all attendees at presentations and made sure I always had a colleague with me. At my first work presentation after the promotion, I spotted Trevor sitting in the back of the audience. My heart nearly stopped, but he remained legally distant as required by the restraining order. I somehow pushed through my anxiety and completed my presentation successfully despite his intimidating presence. I kept expecting him to disrupt the presentation somehow, but he just sat there watching me with an unsettling intensity. Trevor approached several of my coworkers afterward, apparently trying to get information about me, but they had been briefed about the situation beforehand. They refused to engage with him and immediately reported his behavior to security, who escorted him from the building. My colleagues were wonderfully supportive, forming a protective barrier between us as security removed him. About 6 months into the restraining order, Trevor finally seemed to be moving on with his life, and the harassment had decreased significantly. He'd stopped showing up at places where I might be, the blog posts became less frequent, and mutual friends reported he was talking about me less often. Just as I was starting to relax, I received a job offer from a competitor of my current company. The timing seemed suspicious, so I suspected Trevor might have arranged it somehow to get me to leave town. It seemed exactly like the kind of manipulative thing he might do. After investigating, I found out the job offer was completely legitimate and had nothing to do with Trevor. The timing was just a coincidence, but it presented me with a difficult decision about potentially starting fresh in a new city, away from all the drama. The idea of being somewhere Trevor couldn't easily find me was incredibly appealing. The new company offered better pay and advancement opportunities that were really tempting, but it required relocating to another state. I faced a difficult decision about whether this was the right move, or if it would seem like I was running away from the situation. I worried that moving might feel like Trevor had won by forcing me out, but I also recognized that a fresh start might be exactly what I needed. PR encouraged me to consider the offer based on its own merits rather than as an escape route, but he admitted he would really miss me if I moved away. We had grown much closer over the months, supporting each other through Trevor's harassment and spending more time together outside of volunteering. We finally acknowledged that our feelings for each other had grown beyond friendship during all these months of support. We had our first real date at a quiet restaurant where we talked for hours about everything except Trevor. It felt like the first normal, happy experience I'd had in ages. After a lot of consideration, I decided to accept the job offer, but negotiated a delayed start date so I'd have time to properly transition my life and figure out what was happening with my relationship with PR before making such a big move. The new company was eager to have me join their team and was flexible about the timing, which was a huge relief. Trevor somehow learned about my planned departure and saw it as me running away from him rather than advancing my career. He made one last attempt to assert control by showing up at my favorite cafe when I was having lunch with Sophia. I'd let my guard down since he'd been quiet for weeks, and we hadn't expected to see him there. When Trevor approached our table, I remained calm and reminded him about the restraining order, but he grew increasingly agitated and started raising his voice. He was saying things like, "So you think you can just run away after what you did to me?" While other customers stared uncomfortably. Other patrons noticed the confrontation, and staff called the police when it became clear he wouldn't leave voluntarily. The cafe manager actually stood between our table and Trevor until the police arrived, which I was incredibly grateful for. Trevor was arrested for violating the restraining order right there in the cafe, but was released on bail the next day. This incident confirmed that I was making the right decision to move away. After this incident, I expedited my moving plans for my own safety, not wanting to be around when he inevitably escalated again. My new employer was understanding about the situation and allowed me to start earlier than originally planned. PR helped me pack and prepare for the move, but we struggled with defining what our long-distance relationship would look like. We had only been officially dating for a short time, but our connection felt significant after everything we'd been through together. We agreed to visit each other monthly and reevaluate where things stood after 6 months, neither of us wanting to give up on what we'd built together. PR surprised me by researching job opportunities in my new city, although he couldn't relocate immediately due to his current contract. Trevor's violation case for the cafe incident went to court, but he ended up pleading guilty to avoid a full trial that would have looked bad for him. He received probation and mandatory counseling as part of his sentence, which seemed pretty lenient given his pattern of behavior. I was disappointed by the outcome, but relieved that there was at least some official recognition of his violations. The court mandated Trevor attend weekly therapy sessions as part of his probation, but he initially viewed this as punishment rather than an opportunity for growth. His first progress reports showed minimal engagement according to the court documents Sadie obtained for me. He was going through the motions but not actually participating in the therapeutic process in any meaningful way. I settled into my new city and job pretty quickly, but missed PR deeply despite our regular video calls. The job itself was challenging in a good way, with colleagues who knew nothing about my history with Trevor. It was refreshing to be seen for my professional abilities rather than as that girl from the purple slime video or Trevor's ex. We planned for him to visit during my first month in the new place so we could see how the distance felt in reality. I spent days cleaning and preparing my new apartment, wanting everything to be perfect for his visit. PR's visit confirmed that our relationship could potentially survive the distance, but the career opportunities keeping us in separate cities created an ongoing challenge. We had a wonderful week together exploring my new city, but saying goodbye at the airport was harder than I expected. We created intentional routines to maintain our connection, with scheduled calls and virtual date nights alongside the monthly visits. We even started watching the same TV shows so we could discuss them together, creating shared experiences despite the distance. Trevor's therapist apparently had some kind of breakthrough with him after a few months of sessions, according to what mutual friends told me. He had apparently started actually engaging with the process and recognizing some of his behaviors as problematic. I remained skeptical of this supposed change, maintaining all my security precautions despite reports of his improvement. Old habits die hard, and I wasn't taking any chances based on secondhand information. I'd been fooled by Trevor's apologies and promises to change too many times before. 3 months into my new job, I received an unexpected email from Trevor. Instead of the harassment I expected, it contained what seemed like a genuine apology for his behavior. The email was thoughtful and specific, rather than the generic, sorry if you were offended, non-apologies he'd given in the past. I consulted with Sadie about how to respond, if at all, not wanting to open a door to communication, but also curious about whether this represented real change. Part of me wanted closure, but another part was afraid this was just another manipulation tactic. Sadie advised caution regarding Trevor's apology, but suggested it could potentially be genuine based on its content. She pointed out that true apologies acknowledge specific behaviors, take responsibility without making excuses, and don't demand forgiveness, all of which seemed present in Trevor's email. She recommended I read it carefully for manipulative language or hidden messages before deciding how to proceed. The apology acknowledged specific behaviors without making excuses for them, which was different from Trevor's usual deflection tactics. He actually wrote about recognizing his pattern of using humor to hurt others and how therapy had helped him see the damage he'd caused. It also didn't request forgiveness or ask for renewed contact, which made it seem potentially sincere rather than manipulative. There was no, "so now can we be friends again?" or similar request attached. I chose not to respond directly to the email, but did inform my case officer about the communication, so there would be official documentation of this development. I wanted everything on record in case this was the beginning of a new pattern of contact, rather than a one-time message. Trevor respected my decision not to respond to his apology, which was surprising given his previous persistence. His therapist contacted me a few weeks later requesting a mediated session, which I declined. I wasn't ready to be in the same room as Trevor, even with a professional present. Instead, I sent written questions I wanted answered about his behavior and motivations. I wanted to understand why he had become so fixated on humiliating me and others. Trevor provided thorough answers to my questions through his therapist, showing more self-awareness than I'd ever seen from him. He explained how his own insecurities had driven his need to put others down, and how he'd mistaken cruel humor for wit. His answers didn't excuse his behavior, but did provide some context that helped me process what had happened. I remained unwilling to meet in person despite this progress, so we maintained this indirect communication through the therapist as a buffer. This arrangement felt safe while still allowing me to get the closure I needed. PR supported my cautious approach to Trevor's apparent change, but worried about Trevor's continued presence in my life in any capacity. He understood my need for closure, but was concerned about Trevor potentially finding ways to manipulate the situation. We had our first serious disagreement about how to handle the situation, with PR feeling I should cut all ties completely. The distance between us and this disagreement put a significant strain on our relationship for a while. We struggled to communicate effectively about such a sensitive topic over video calls. We committed to working through it rather than giving up, and PR eventually applied for positions in my new city so we could be together. We both recognized that this disagreement was partly fueled by the stress of long distance and partly by PR's protective instincts rather than fundamental incompatibility. PR received a job offer at a hospital in my new city after several interviews, but it paid less than his current position back home. We had to carefully consider the financial implications alongside the emotional benefits of being in the same place. We spent hours creating budgets and 5-year plans, trying to make a rational decision about what was best for both our careers and our relationship. Meanwhile, Trevor completed his court-mandated therapy, but continued sessions voluntarily according to mutual friends. His therapist reported significant progress in addressing his underlying behavior patterns and anger issues, which surprised everyone who knew him. Some friends who had initially sided with him even reached out to apologize to me for not understanding the full situation. As the 1-year restraining order approached its expiration date, I was uncertain about whether I should pursue a renewal. Part of me wanted to maintain the legal protection, but another part wanted to move forward without continuing the legal battles. I consulted both Sadie and my own therapist about my options and what would be best for my ongoing recovery. They both suggested carefully considering whether renewal was truly necessary based on Trevor's recent behavior, but reminded me it was entirely my decision, and I shouldn't feel pressured either way. They emphasized that my safety and peace of mind were the priority, regardless of Trevor's apparent progress. After a lot of reflection, I decided not to renew the restraining order since there hadn't been any concerning behavior for several months. The process of renewing would mean another court appearance and potentially reopening wounds that were finally starting to heal. I did establish clear boundaries through our lawyers, so Trevor knew exactly what types of contact would be considered harassment if he reverted to old patterns. This gave me some protection without requiring the full legal process. PR finally moved to my city after working out a compromise with the hospital about his compensation package. They couldn't match his previous salary but offered better benefits and a clear path to advancement that made the move financially feasible. He needed some time to adjust to his new position and the move, so we continued building our relationship slowly and intentionally rather than rushing into living together immediately. We decided to wait at least 6 months before considering moving in together, giving ourselves time to adjust to being in the same city again. Trevor eventually moved to another state for a fresh start, according to mutual friends. He sent one final message through his therapist letting me know he was continuing to work on his issues with professional help, which gave me some closure on that chapter of my life. The message included his new contact information, just in case, but acknowledged that he didn't expect me to use it. Months passed without any contact from Trevor, but occasional memories of the relationship and its dramatic end still affected me sometimes, especially around anniversaries of significant events. The first anniversary of the purple slime incident was particularly difficult, bringing back feelings of humiliation and anger I thought I'd moved past. PR and I developed healthy ways to process these moments together as I continued healing from the experience. He was patient when I needed to talk about it and supportive when I needed distraction. 1 year after moving to the new city, my life had transformed completely in ways I never could have imagined when I was still with Trevor. My career was thriving with a recent promotion to department head, and PR and I had finally moved in together, creating a home that felt truly safe for the first time in years. Our relationship had grown stronger through all the challenges we'd faced, and we were talking about long-term future plans together. The occasional nightmares about Trevor had mostly faded, replaced by plans for our future together and the life we were building. I still maintained some precautions out of habit, keeping my social media accounts private and using a P.O. box for mail, but the constant hypervigilance had subsided as I realized Trevor was truly out of my life. I no longer jumped when my phone rang or worried about running into him around every corner. My relationship with my mother continued to strengthen through weekly calls and quarterly visits, healing a relationship I thought was permanently broken. We'd worked through a lot of our past issues in family therapy, and she had become one of my biggest supporters. Sophia had moved nearby for a job opportunity, bringing our friendship full circle as we now volunteered together at a women's shelter, where I occasionally shared my story to help others recognize relationship red flags before they escalate. She was dating TJ now, which was a sweet, unexpected development that came from all this chaos. TJ had become a good friend too, having also moved past the Trevor chapter of his life and gained confidence in a new company where his ideas were respected. His stutter had improved significantly as his confidence grew, and he'd been promoted twice since leaving Trevor's old company. The final thread of that painful time came when Trevor's old company contacted me about using my experience anonymously in their workplace harassment training programs. After careful consideration, I agreed, finding unexpected closure and knowing my ordeal might prevent someone else from suffering similar treatment. I worked with their HR team to develop a case study that highlighted the warning signs and impact of workplace bullying. When a mutual acquaintance mentioned running into Trevor in his new city, apparently sober, in therapy, and working a steady job, I felt nothing but a detached wish for his continued recovery and growth. There was no anger, no fear, just a vague hope that he had actually changed for the better and wouldn't hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt me. That evening, as PR and I walked home from dinner, he squeezed my hand and asked if I was okay after hearing about Trevor. I realized I genuinely was. The woman who had once smiled through humiliation to please an abuser was gone. In her place stood someone who understood her worth, demanded respect, and had built a life filled with authentic love and support. Trevor no longer had power over my thoughts or feelings. I had not only escaped his orbit, but created a new universe entirely my own. And it was so much better than anything I could have imagined while opening that purple slime box at a fancy party 18 months ago.